Welcome back to Open Line. Talking about a big topic tonight. We're talking about a recent article that really went viral, and it claimed that for the millennial generation, millennials being born from 1981 to 1996, burnout is not a temporary affliction, it's the millennial condition. It's the base temperature. It's the way things are. And what are some of the factors? It's challenging economic conditions, it's intensive parenting, and it's the feeling that they have to be working all of the time. And then also this feeling that they've done these things, they've played by the rules, and then the economy, it hasn't worked out in so many cases. We have with us psychologist Anna Settle. Thank you for being here. And in this article, it talks about errand paralysis, that the manifestation of this burnout is the inability, they're functioning at a high level, perhaps, but then the inability to do basic things. In the article, I think it was talking about maybe registering to vote or something, just basic things. There's some things that are just overwhelming.
Yes.
Do you see that? What do you see there?
Yes, I absolutely see that. Yeah, and I know that I keep going back to social media and screens and the impact that those things have. But I do believe that they're so stimulated all of the time from all different directions, and that affects the limbic system. I mean, there's a biological component to that where they are stimulated all the time. And so something like mailing a letter, or like we were talking about earlier, just running errands, seems so mundane and boring, and it also does not qualify as being productive. And so they feel like that they should be doing something else, and then those things fall by the wayside. But then they feel guilty because they don't feel like they're able to do those things. Then they isolate themselves. Then they feel like they have social anxiety. Then they feel scattered, so they diagnose themselves with ADHD. So there's a snowball effect here. And I do think that a lot of it is related to being overstimulated all of the time.
So ADHD, boy, that's a whole nother thing.
Yes.
But that's a huge thing for this generation.
Yes.
Is it overdiagnosed? I mean, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I love that this generation is so much more progressive when we're talking about mental health and mental illness. They're much more open. And I'll say, too, they are great friends to one another. They seem to be more authentic than previous generations. So people are being vulnerable and talking about things like mental health. Having said that, I do think that this sort of scattered feeling or feeling isolated because they're texting or talking through social media sites, so they're not having practice of interacting, starting at a young age, even the teenagers these days. So we're seeing things like social anxiety that maybe wouldn't in fact be the case if they were just exposed to a little more interaction and put the phones down a bit.
So there may be something to, there may be more social anxiety now than we've seen.
Yes.
And that could be because, I guess, they're not getting the practice that other generations had. The awkward high school or middle school dance, where everyone, whatever, it's just awkward. And that's maybe not taking place as much.
Right. And think about the consequences of messing up. You just do something silly and it's on 4 different social media sites and everybody's liking or commenting. And so they just don't have the space to go out and practice those things in the way that other generations did.
So this article talks about burnout. Is that something that you see?
Yes, for sure.
What does that mean? I mean, so everyone's like, well, I'm tired. And every generation would say, boy, I've worked hard and I'm tired, whatever. What does burnout mean? How does it manifest itself?
Yeah, I mean, for me, when I see a patient that I feel like is experiencing burnout, it's really just apathy in general. It looks a little bit like depression, but usually the trigger for that is that they are overstimulated or they're working too much or they're just they're not taking time for self-care. So it's not always rooted in biological depression, but it looks very similar to that. So it's what we call anhedonia. They aren't finding pleasure in things they used to enjoy. They aren't wanting to go out with friends. They're sleeping too much. They're not feeling very motivated. So it looks similar to depression in those ways.
And what do you do for it? I mean, how do you treat it? Is it a 2-week vacation? Does that do it? Or is it a complete change in all that you're doing in life? I guess, what do you do?
Yeah, I mean, a 2-week vacation, you could take your cell phone and all of your work and all of your texts and all of your emails follow you on vacation. He made the comment, he called it the inbox of shame, which I think is hilarious. I mean, I have the inbox of shame, It's like I have 20,000 emails that I haven't responded to, but then you get so inundated that you feel guilty. And so 2 weeks, you're gone for 2 weeks. Think about all of the things that come up during those 2 weeks, and then you come back and you're in a place where you're trying to catch up, and then burnout ensues from vacation, which is terrible, but it happens.
That is the inbox of shame. So what do we do? I mean, I don't see how that is sustainable, right?
I agree, yeah.
And yet, all of this technology, which makes things simpler, it can have these sort of negative problems with it. And
right.
and if there is, if there's somebody who's like, I'm not going to touch my cell phone for 2 weeks or whatever, there are 10 other people who will.
Right.
And so, I guess, again, that's why this is not just the millennial problem. I think it's a cultural problem.
Right.
But what do we do?
Yeah.
Where are we headed?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just you have to shift your perspective and have boundaries. I mean, that's what we do. And of course, as a psychologist, I'm going to say that's done through therapy, right? But when I get people who come in and they're experiencing burnout, we take, what are you prioritizing? What are the things that fulfill you? What do you feel like your gift is? And oftentimes the ways that they are spending their time have nothing to do with those things. So it's not fulfilling. They don't feel successful because they're not using their strengths to contribute. So we kind of have sort of a paradigm shift and look at things differently, and also recognize that self-care equals healthy. So it's okay. You don't have to unplug for 2 weeks and not answer your boss's emails, but it is okay to say at 5:30, if you've already made plans to do something with a friend, you get asked to stay over, or you receive an email, not to check it and to say, I'll catch up with you in the morning. It usually is going to be okay.
Mm-hmm. And that is something you see a lot. You see people that are dealing with that
yes.
a decent amount.
Right. Well, and it's so competitive.
Is it a certain age of people? Because again, the article's talking about millennials, or is it all ages, or mainly what about that? What you're seeing there?
Yeah, I would say with the millennial generation, it happens more. But for sure, it's just a cultural problem. I mean, we're all too connected. We all feel guilty if we check out.
And where do you think that leads us? Because we now have identified it, right? Okay, so social media is a huge thing. It's great. We all know what our friends are doing. We can look up our friends, whatever. But then you hear over and over, okay, we have all these friends, but we're more alone. We're
right.
more isolated than we've ever been. I mean, social media has taken off. I was talking to somebody today that said if they could do away with it, they would,
mm-hmm.
but they feel like they can't.
Right.
And so, where do you think we go? Do we do away with it? Probably not, right? The cat's out of the bag.
Right.
Do we find more parameters for it, or does it just keep taking on this life of its own?
Yeah, I mean, we have to dial it back. It's going to have to happen at some point. Because I do think a lot of the mental illness that we're seeing, those things that are happening symptom-wise, suicide especially, is being connected to that. And so we're going to have to, in some way, figure out how to dial that back and be okay with it.
And so how is suicide connected to that specifically?
So, I mean, I think just looking at other people and pictures that are not real life on social media, people are comparing sort of their dark moments or their mistakes to somebody else's highlight reel, and it makes them feel bad about themselves. And then, they might put something out there and then other people are commenting on it. When you're doing that from behind a computer or a cell phone, it's much easier to say things that you wouldn't normally say. So people can be pretty critical. And for kids in their formative years, and for even millennials who are still kind of figuring this out, that can be pretty detrimental to have so many people talking negatively about you.
Are there some things that you're seeing done in other states or communities or school districts? As you're on the front lines of all this. Are there some things that are being done that you see as a healthy move in the right direction?
Yeah, I mean, I think Nashville is very progressive. We're doing a lot of things to increase awareness about mental health, and people are now using social media as a platform to talk about that. So I think that's healthy. Again, going back to having the meditation app on your phone that you check into to make sure you're checking the box meditating 5 minutes a day. I think it can be a little much, but I do think it's being used as a way to open up the discussion about it. And again, like I said, millennials are much more open to talking about it when they're having these symptoms, where I feel like in generations past, people didn't really discuss it. People would come in and they might have somatic complaints. My stomach's been hurting, my head's been hurting. Now I have people in the millennial generation that will come in first session, they'll say, I've been experiencing suicidal thoughts. And they're pretty open about it.
Wow, fascinating. All right, let's go to Mel. Is that right, Mel, on line 1 here? Are you there?
Yes.
Go right ahead. What's on your mind?
Okay, I have a comment that I think what I'm seeing is, I guess the best way I could say would be a technological, intellectual expansion, but an emotional contraction. And I can, as an analogy, I could say I started seeing it in the 80s in music when you started, instead of using your imagination and emotions by listening to a song, you started seeing videos, which limited your imagination and your emotions. And I think, many people today are not using their imagination and their emotions, and therefore they're not fulfilling their potentials like they should be.
Fascinating.
That's my idea about it.
Mel, thank you for that call. A technological expansion and an emotional contraction.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I like that.
I think he's spot on.
And so then, is it wrong to just demonize the technology? Is it wrong? Is that so we're seeming to identify the main thing is our this ever-present social media, this ever-present connectedness.
Yes.
That would seem, to be positive on some level, but it has these drawbacks. Is that the number one thing, or is it something else? What do you think? Or what else is there besides that?
Right. Well, I think it's the pressure that we put on kids and millennials as well. And some of that stems from social media. There are parents who are looking at things on social media and they feel like that their children should produce to a certain level. So that can certainly be connected. But yeah, I think the idea that this individualistic society where you look out for number one, you got to be the best, which is not quite as collectivist as some other cultures, but in our society, it's always about winning. And so I think, social media plays a role, being connected plays a role, but it's also sort of the morals and the values that we're instilling in them.
And I think in the article that we keep mentioning, this was an article that went viral and it was fascinating. You can find it if you look out burnout, millennials and burnout. It talked about, I believe, millennials were taught, this whole generation, again, between 81 and 96, to play by the rules. They weren't necessarily taught to challenge the rules, to change the rules, to play by the rules, and things will work out well. And so that's what they tried to do. And then this economy was not one that was favorable to coming out with large amounts of student debt and those kind of things.
Right.
But do you think are they primarily rule followers? Is this a generation of rule followers, and is it too simplistic to apply something, a label like that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going from just sort of anecdotal experiences in my practice, but I don't really see that all that often. I see them sort of challenging ideas, especially rigid conservative ones, and they're talking a little bit more about their own opinions instead of just sort of taking on their parents' perspectives. So I honestly haven't seen a lot of the rule-following rigidity that he mentions.
And I guess, the other thing to challenge that is we are beginning to see they're saying, I'm not going to, whether they can or not, I guess, I'm not going to work at the same sort of job forever. I want to now kind of just experience life and that kind of thing. So we are kind of seeing some of that as well. And that's a challenge to what I guess they were told for a long time. Let's go to Tammy here. Hello, Tammy? Tammy, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, go right ahead. What's on your mind?
Okay, so I just first of all wanted to say God bless this woman. I don't know her name, but we need to have this conversation more out in the open for everybody to listen to and talk about, because I'm over 40, I'll say that. And I just think that these millennials do need to have a better fundamental foundation to stand on than what they're seeing today.
And what do you mean by that? What do you mean?
I just mean that it's like we're getting off into a little frenzy that, the important things in life isn't mattering as much as what all of us older folks have grown up to believe and know about. Like, look out for one another, not yourself.
You think some of these values are different? They're skewed. We've kind of moved away from some of those.
The values, the uncertainty really of the world today is just it's hard on everybody. It don't matter what age you are. We all hear about what's going on in the world today, and I think we all just need to practice accepting each other and trying to reel each other in and know that we are important.
All right, good. Thank you, Tammy. Thank you. What do you think there?
Yeah, I think she's right. I was just talking earlier about, I even am inclined, if I'm in my office and I have my laptop open, if somebody comes in to have a conversation with me and I have so many things to do, to just kind of focus on the laptop and hope that maybe they'll, catch that I'm a little too busy to have a conversation. But then I think, that's not what is important, especially in my job. It's interaction and connection. It's so much more important to have a conversation with someone than to feel like you're doing something every second of the day. But I think these millennials, they feel like if I'm not being productive, then I'm failing. And so if I stop to have a conversation, well, then I'm not being productive. And so I don't know that it's necessarily that that they're unkind or that they don't want to connect, but I think they often see that as an interruption to the productivity that we're talking about.
Yeah, this need to constantly be productive. Life has been flattened out into a series of to-do lists. All right, we're going to take a break. If you're on the line, hold on. We'll get to your call. We'll take a break. Be back right after this.